Hello, everyone. I'm Julie Glenn, News Director here at WGCU News. Welcome to the Virtual Water Summit, hosted by the Friends of the Everglades, Naples Daily News, the News Press, and WGCU News. For the next hour and a half, we plan to look at water issues in Southwest Florida and what legislative action can, could, or should improve the situation from the federal government on down. We'll begin with U.S. Representative for Florida's 19th District, Byron Donalds. We had hoped to talk with Southwest Florida's delegation to our state's capital to talk about what statewide environmental initiatives passed or didn't pass this legislative session. Just one of them could make it. Bob Rommel from Florida's 106th District. He's one of 10 people elected to represent our district in Tallahassee, all of whom were invited via email and several phone calls. Two declined the invitation. The others did not respond. So we will be talking with Mr. Rommel as the sole representative on statewide issues, no pressure there. And then we'll hear from the water quality advocacy groups, a segment that will be led by Eve Samples with the Friends of the Everglades. And then we'll have a journalist roundtable discussion about bills that passed, which could impact our water. So let's just dig in. Amy Bennett Williams with the News Press is joining me to talk with Representative Byron Donalds. Amy, thank you so much for joining in. I'll hand off to you for the first question.
Thank you, and good morning. Congressman Donalds, thanks so much for being here today. The last time we were together was at the debate, and water quality was at the very top of your priority list. So with everything that's been going on in the past couple of months, if you could please update us on what's happening, any progress on bringing attention to Everglades restoration. And also, as an alum of the Florida legislature, when you see what's going on here, do you just feel like a spectator, or do you feel like you're sort of in on what's going on?
Well, first of all, Amy, Julie, it's good to be with you again. Wish we could do this in person. Hopefully we'll be back to that in very, very, very short order. Real quick, let me just update everybody what we're doing with respect to water quality for Southwest Florida. Job number one continues to be the CERT project, working with colleagues in the Appropriations Committee and actually members on both sides of the political aisle in Florida to make sure that we have the necessary funding from the federal level to match state dollars to continue Everglades restoration. This is something that was work, frankly, that was started by my two predecessors, Congressman Clausen before Congressman Rooney. My job is to really just take the ball and keep going. And so whether it's myself, Congressman Mass, Congresswoman Frankel, Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and obviously Congressman Diaz-Balart, everybody in the southern part of Florida understands the importance of completion of the CERT projects. Our job in Florida, being the second largest state delegation in Congress, is to just make sure that we do everything we can to get those dollars where they need to be. Other things that we're looking at. Sorry. You may have another question. Well,
just to follow up to that, the Comprehensive Everglades Restoration Plan is what you are talking about when you say CERP, just so anybody in the audience might not be clear. That plan is 21 years old now. Mm-hmm. It could legally buy alcohol at this point if a plan could. And this one might. I mean, this is definitely a long game. Where do we stand now and where do we need to get?
That's actually a great question. Unfortunately, there's only been one project that's been completed in the CERT plan. And that's really the fault of that is that for 2 decades, well, really about 15 years, Congress and the state just didn't put money towards Everglades restoration. That's just what happened. But we've had many conversations with the Army Corps of Engineers, Southwest Florida Water Management District, and the project plan still makes sense. They would still help to keep our water clean. What we need to do is consistently fund it. So even though the plan itself is 2 decades old, about to turn 21, the projects are still viable. What's going on? One of the main projects I'll add that's happening right now is an adjustment to the wells, the ASR wells, deep injection well project that's supposed to happen north of Lake Okeechobee. Southwest Florida Water Management District currently head with the ASR wells. These are wells where you can actually dispense of water and bring some water back depending on what's going on with flow. They're currently trying to figure out how to move or where to put the deep injection wells that would actually be able to satisfy all constituencies that are in the northern part of that are at the north side of Lake Okeechobee. So yeah, you're correct. The plan is old, but we're still following that plan. It gets continuously studied by just about everybody who has interest in water restoration, and it's still the best plan going to solve our water problems.
It just needs to get funded and get done.
That's exactly right. Funded and done. That's what we got to do.
And my next question, interestingly enough, this morning, the news broke that several environmental groups were going to ask the governor to declare a state of emergency because of harmful algae blooms. And your very first bill that you introduced was on forecasting and making sure that it stays in place and active. Can you bring us up to date on what's going on with that? And if there's any way to relate that to the news of the day?
Well, we are concerned about algae bloom formations in the southern part of the lake. One of the things that has happened is because the rehabilitation of the Herbert Hoover Dike is just about complete. The Army Corps is allowed to hold some additional water. They've been doing that. There have been minor releases to our coast and to the other coasts. Those releases have happened, but that's a part of the overall schedule. I'm a little hesitant on a state of emergency being filed as of yet, or being called as of yet. I don't think we're quite there. I think there's still mitigation that can happen. Number one is the continued discharges that do occur from Lake Okeechobee. Number two is also going to be just how much rain we're going to get over the next couple of months. If we have an incredibly wet season, in our normal wet season, I would be a little bit more concerned. But part of the entire Lake Okeechobee system is how much rainfall does the state actually get? And that's part of the equation. None of us really get a full understanding until we're actually walking through that time. One of the other things I would add to that is my office, and I know several offices, are currently going through a process with the Army Corps about the LOSUM schedule. This is the release schedule out of the lake. My office is in contact with the Army Corps to try to put together a comprehensive release schedule that makes sense for our coast as well as all of Florida.
And are you planning on sponsoring any other legislation or any other tactics that you have to move the water quality agenda forward?
The key thing right now for us, the most pertinent thing is going to be the revised release schedule from Lake Okeechobee. We're meeting with Army Corps on that. Army Corps is going through their reviews of different schedules right now. And my job is to advocate for what's in the best interest of Southwest Florida. But also at the same time, what I want to make sure everybody to a good discharge schedule for all of South Florida. It'd be great if no water came this way. Actually, it wouldn't be great because we still need water out of Lake Okeechobee. We don't have the luxury of just saying we don't want any water, we can't take it. We're going to take some in. We need to take some in depending on the period, the time of year. So what we really need is a comprehensive schedule that's updated based upon the new dynamics that exist. The fact that you're going to have more projects be completed over the next couple of years. We're working with Army Corps on that. Other legislation, I don't really think is needed. What's needed, frankly, is to fund the projects. When we get that business done, then we can then assess what else is going to be needed for the betterment of our water.
All right. And I know that, and you know as well, that this is a huge hot button issue in Southwest Florida. And I know that engagement is a priority of yours. You're having a teletown hall tonight. Do you have any plans about creating engagement events with people down here, the way that Francis Rooney did, bringing in people from different agencies and environmental stakeholder groups? Can you discuss what your ideas are about that kind of a forum and you facilitating it?
Well, we actually have been talking internally about doing a forum, but we haven't finalized those plans. What I have been doing is meeting with different stakeholders in the area. A few weeks ago, maybe a month ago now, I was actually up in Sanibel meeting with several interests around Sanibel, Captiva, in that area of the congressional district, because obviously Sanibel and Captiva take the brunt of discharges from Lake Okeechobee. That's my meeting with them, going over just kind of what their ideas are, what concerns them, the issue, what they want to see move forward first. I also spent time actually in the eastern Everglades with stakeholders from all the way down, with every part of our water system, people coming from as far as Florida Bay to discuss all the issues associated with the Everglades. It wasn't my meeting per se, but you had several members of Congress who were a part of that meeting. It was very comprehensive. It was an all-day meeting where we kind of went over everything associated with water flow, and it just wasn't discharges. It was actually water levels in different parts of the Everglades system, and kind of trying to bring everybody together. And I think that's really the one thing that's going to kind of get us through the next couple of years, is working together with all stakeholders to make sure that we balance the water needs of the entire, frankly, southern peninsula of Florida.
Yeah. I am curious about climate change and sea level rise, and several municipalities have just signed a compact talking about resiliency and sort of linking arms. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think with resiliency, I think, obviously the state is taking a stab at that. I'm aware of some of what they've been doing, but don't quote me on the specifics because Congress is a different animal. But I am aware that the state and the governor have taken resiliency on as something that they want to try to lead the way on in the state. I think that's a good idea. With respect to, how we're going to deal with, anthropologic global warming, climate change, whatever you want to call it. You got to understand that in the United States, we've actually cut our carbon emissions pretty substantially over this. In some respects, depending on what measures you want to look at, the United States, I wouldn't say is the leader in the world, but we're definitely in the top 10. And so we've been doing the right thing in our country. Our energy grid has become far more efficient. It will continue to become more efficient. Speaking about, if sea level rise and climate change is an issue that really impacts you, or you think is a critical issue, then one of the things I've been advocating for quite some time is we should be embracing more nuclear power in our system. Nuclear power is clean. Also, the technology is not the old technology that people think about. Now the fuel rods are basically 100% spent. So you're not going to have to deal with long-term nuclear storage, nuclear waste, like we've had to do with the old reactors. The technology is very, very different. Our country should embrace it going forward.
And speaking of carbon technology, the extended moratorium on oil drilling, what are you hearing about that? Are you hearing pushback? What are your thoughts on that?
Not hearing too much pushback on it. I'm aware of the permit that's coming up. I believe it's in the Everglades or it's in Picayune. I can't remember which part it's in. So don't quote me about specifically. But I know that we have that. When it comes to offshore drilling, no, we're not. I'm not going to be supportive of that. So I'm glad that's going to remain in place. But on these permits that do exist in different parts, I think they have to be examined on a case-by-case basis. We do have drilling that currently exists in the Everglades. It's been there for quite some time, and so those wells are intact. They're pumping out every single day. I've toured one or two of them myself, and in my time, whether it's the state legislature or now in Congress. So I think when it comes to on-land wells, we have to judge them based upon what's actually happening at that site. When it comes to offshore drilling, that's not something I'm going to support.
And speaking of drilling and water issues in general, the Miccosukee tribe of Indians and the Seminoles are separate governments. And I know that there has been some concern about our government to government communication and negotiation with the tribes. I'm curious if this is something that's on your radar and how you think that all the stakeholders ought to be included, including stakeholders from other governments, other nations.
Well, I will tell you specifically to that. This is one of the things that is somewhat of the negotiating process when it comes to deep injection wells, and it's been with the Indian tribes, excuse me, their governments, and our water management district in the state of Florida. So I think that there is good communication there. Again, I don't want to comment on the issue, on the negotiations and the conversations between our state and the different governments in our state, because that's really the purview of the governor. In some respects, it's the purview of the president. It's not really a purview for a member of Congress. But I think we've been doing a good job to this point, and we'll see how those negotiations go.
Do you find yourself kind of being a bit of an ambassador for Florida? I mean, this role in the United States government has to be very different from what you had experienced before. How was that adjustment for you? I mean, I haven't seen you since before the election. So I just wanted to kind of get like a personal, how different was it, and how hard is it for you to translate what's happening here in Southwest Florida, especially concerning environmental issues and water, when you go to DC? It's completely, as you said, a different animal, a different point of view.
Well, I got to tell you, it is different. But when it comes to our environmental issues, it's not just me. Like I said earlier, basically every member of Congress south of I-4 is an ambassador for our environmental issues and what needs to get done here in Florida. And so I think and I don't want to take any credit for that. Like I said at the beginning, I really got to put that in the hands of Congressman Rooney and Congressman Clausen, because they really did a good job making sure that the delegation was working together to address these issues. And, I think in DC, everybody watching knows that we fight and we argue about a bunch of different issues. But when it comes to water policy for our state, the delegation really is on the same page. And we've been more vocal as a delegation for several years now. So the transition really hasn't been too difficult. A lot aware of what the issues are down here, and so it's just a matter of being consistent and not letting the pressure up, so to speak.
How hard is it to elevate conversations about the environment amidst all kinds of other issues? I mean, your first day was
Yeah.
pretty jarring, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So how hard is it in the middle of everything else seeming to be on fire, is it to bring up water?
I would say it's a little bit more challenging. I mean, just bringing up any other issue is challenging in these times, and it's not just dealing with obviously what happened on January 6th. It's also the fact that we've been in a COVID environment in Congress, so it has been more difficult. But that's when you just really take the time to meet with your colleagues on a one-on-one basis, and it's not just the other members; it's also the agencies. Having dialogue for our water issues, obviously with the Army Corps, federal agency, having these different conversations as much as you can is really the way you do it. It's tough. A lot of it is, sitting in boxes, kind of like we're doing right now, where people are watching on screen. We've been able to have some face-to-face meetings, which is far more helpful. But I think I would probably say that's more the challenge now, especially when you're dealing with agencies, because, agency representatives don't really get too caught up in hyper political stuff.
All right. Well, I'm glad. I got to say, just personally, even though I'm a journalist, I got to say I'm glad that you're continuing the Rooney environmental version of Republicans. I remember that we were all kind of a little surprised when he was leading delegations to say, "Hey, this is what sea level rise is doing. The water's coming up to here." When we went to Keewaydin Island, I'm glad to see that type of a legacy is going to be able to continue, and that you're keeping the water quality issues that we're facing here in Southwest Florida top of mind, even though there are a lot of things that are looking for attention up there and top of mind. Amy, you and I both know that's been a sipping from a water hose situation when it comes to news in the last year.
Yeah, and to that point, of course, I have no opinions myself personally, but one thing that you and I talked about, Congressman Donalds, is how you reach the people who didn't vote for you and yet whom you still represent. And I'd like to ask you what you would like that group to know, the people who supported your opponent and are also very passionately interested in water issues. What do you want them to hear from you?
Well, the first thing is, I would definitely want them, with any concerns they have, to, contact my office. My staff's in the office every single day. We're answering the phones nonstop. So really, if you can, go to donalds.house.gov, contact my office. Any issues, questions, concerns, we definitely want to address them. That's number one. Number two, you mentioned it earlier. We have our teletown hall tonight. I hope people can join. But we're actually going to start doing in-person town halls, because it's important to hear from the entire constituency. Because especially when it comes to water policy, that has nothing to do with politics. That's our environment. It's our economy. It's important that we just get the job done. And there's no time to be playing games with it. You just have to do it. So that's what I would probably tell the people who didn't vote for me. The third is, just, give me a chance, give me an opportunity to actually go do the job. And that's something that I take seriously, especially when it comes to water, because like I said, that's not about politics. That's just about us being able to maintain our lifestyle that we love here in Southwest Florida, but while making sure we leave it in good hands, at least as good as it is now or better for years to come.
Well, if you're planning on doing in-person town halls, I'd like to get ahead of the curve here and extend the invitation for you to have the town hall here at WGCU. We'd love to host you and have you do that and help you get that out in front of more of your constituency via televising it. So if you would like to do that, let us know. Let's set that up now. So we'll plan on it when we end up deciding to do that.
I'll probably take you up on that one. That would not be a bad idea. I'd love to do
Absolutely.
it.
Well, we did the debates and it was good. It was fun. So I mean, let's have you back. Amy, what were you going to say?
It's a nice big audience, and you really have
we have some good
wide
viewership.
reach. Yeah,
a lot of people watch us. So yeah, we'd really love to have you come and do that town hall here with us, and we'd love to help facilitate that in any way that we can. So have your people talk to our people, and we will make that happen.
No, well, that sounds great. You know, obviously, the big thing I will tell you is, you know, just being able to communicate with everybody. It's kind of tough. I mean, we stay active on Facebook and kind of are always alerting of, you know, bills or votes or things that are going on, issues that do come up. We do talk about that. But it's a little difficult. It's challenging in these times, especially, you know, and I'm not saying anything you guys don't know. People can kind of go into their corner to get their information. So it's difficult to just use one or two mediums to really get to everyone. But, you know, we're up to the task. We're going to do everything we can to stay in contact, stay in communication, and you know, represent the area that I was elected to serve.
And being there in person helps, because then you don't just hear from the people who have the energy to write in, because that's the rare constituent that actually goes to the effort to find your email address and then send the email that they're so mad about this thing or that thing. But in person, you get a little bit more give and take. I think that'll be great to see. So we look forward to that.
No, I did where was I? I've done a couple of in-person events this year. And, you know, sometimes people want you to give a speech, but oftentimes I don't give speeches. I just let the audience ask questions, and then we just kind of have a dialogue, because, you know, I've always found that, you know, when people come to an event, they already have concerns in their mind. To be honest, they're not really interested in hearing you give a speech. You know, they just want to hear the issues be addressed. And so if there's anything I would relay to the voters and to the people of Southwest Florida, is that if you come to my town hall or to my events, not going to be a lot of speeches. It's really just going to be one-on-one questions, really get an opportunity to hear from the people of Southwest Florida.
So looking forward, what do you have on your plate? What's coming up that you're looking forward to?
Well,
legislatively or otherwise?
We're going back to DC. I leave tomorrow to go back up. You know, one of the big things that's coming is I think, and this is tough in the current form of the current way the federal government is operating, because you know, Speaker Pelosi and President Biden don't really release the actual text of their bills and their budgetary ideas. They kind of show up a couple days before the votes come. So I think what we're going to probably see soon is the actual elements of this infrastructure plan. My hope is that the CERT projects are in the waterways part of this infrastructure bill. But to be frank, I think this infrastructure bill, if we want to be serious about infrastructure in our country, we can get a lot done for 20% of the price tag. $2 trillion is not necessary to be spent, especially considering the fact that we're having some inflation concerns. I mean, the price of lumber is going up. The price of a lot of commodities are going up quite rapidly in the United States. And so inflation is a concern. And so I think it's important that if the president wants to actually tackle infrastructure, we can do that in a meaningful way without just creating a major inflationary environment, which would actually harm seniors and harm poor families.
Well, I think that it is going to be interesting to see if CERP is part of that huge budgetary announcement.
So we'll see how it goes. I got to tell you, it's funny. You guys probably 10 times hear about it quicker than I do. Just the
I
way it
love
works. That's DC these days.
We like to know what's going on. But anyway, no, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with us and to kind of go over some of the issues that are hard to raise at a time when there are a lot more urgent issues. I mean, not that the water quality situation is not incredibly urgent, but there's been such a legacy of kicking the can down the road for so long, especially in
Right.
Florida. I mean, we saw evidence of that in the Piney Point thing where the toxic water was put right into Tampa Bay. I'm sure you watched that with great interest. But getting that SERP funding to happen and to work on getting that 21-year long project, it's been rolling, but to get it funded and done, like you said earlier, would be really interesting to see. But I know that you said that you had things you needed to get going on, that you needed to work because you're busy and getting ready to head back up to DC. But I want to thank you for the time that you took to talk with us today, and I very much appreciate it.
We all do. Thank you.
Anytime. You guys have a good day.
You too.
Thank you so much. So get after that SERP money. All right. Well, for this segment of the Water segment, we were hoping to talk with Representative Rommel, but he hasn't joined us at this point. So instead of chit-chatting with Representative Donalds and taking more of his time, we're going to pivot now and talk to some of the, or I'm hoping we talk with some of the stakeholders in the water situation here. It's going to be a summit with the stakeholders in Everglades Restoration. I'm turning it over now to the Executive Director of the Friends of the Everglades, Eve Samples. Eve, are you with us? There she is.
Hi, Julie. How are you? And I just got word that Representative Rommel may, in fact, be here. So, well, as much as I'd like to kick off our advocacy roundtable,
Right.
would you like to take it away with Representative Rommel, and we'll pop back in a few minutes.
All right, Representative Rommel, are you here? I see me. All right, there you are.
Yeah, half of my head is showing. I have no idea why, but technology works sometimes.
Well, I see you. So
Better.
I'm glad that you're able to join us. We invited everybody that is a local representative up to Tallahassee to join us. And you're the only one that took us up on the offer. So I really appreciate it.
Well, it's an important issue for us, and even though we're just finishing with session, we need to, keep the conversation going.
Mm-hmm. So you're going to be the one that is representing for everyone. You represent the 106th district, and you have a background in the restaurant industry. So I bet that this last year has just held you riveted as you're watching small businesses aching and trying to get back to normal. I'm sure that I would imagine that this has been much of your focus in the last several months.
Obviously COVID, played a role in, everything that we did this year. Back a year ago in March, we had no idea where we were going to end up budget-wise. But luckily, we were able to deal with COVID and allow businesses to, operate, which, gave us the opportunity to fund a bunch of the things that we wanted to fund.
Mm-hmm. So how have you seen anything as the chair of the regulatory reform subcommittee that has come across your desk that is in regards to water quality?
Regulatory reform, that really wasn't the silo that, we were in. It was more about business license, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say no, environmental issues and water quality issues did not come across, my particular silo.
But just in terms of what your colleagues were discussing overall, at what level of priority does water quality seem to be?
As a whole, as a body, and again, sorry about this camera, I have no idea what's happening. But as a whole, I think as the Florida House, I understand that water quality is an important issue. As we see 1,100 people a day moving into the state, besides clean drinking water, we need to make sure that we deal with the issues just from, population growth and, from the past 100 years, we'll say decisions that turned out to be the wrong decisions that we should have made for the environment.
But we're in kind of a tough situation in that we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people moving here all the time, every day.
1,100 a day.
Yeah, that's a significant number of people. that's going to be a tough thing to balance when we're looking for large swaths of land to filter as filter marshes. That when we're building on top of these things, that's going to have an impact. So it's going to be a tough balance. I mean, how do you anticipate moving forward when we have this many people moving here and that much building that needs to be done, and that much land that's still also necessary to help naturally clean the water that's heading south?
Well, what's great with Florida, it's probably still 90% of the state will never ever be built upon. So, where people are living, it's probably less than 10% of the actual mass of land. So I think that we're doing a good job balancing it. And, water quality is definitely improving. As somebody that's been a Fisher person for my entire life, I mean, I see water quality improvement, but we have to continue to fund those projects and, especially the Everglades Restoration Act, to get all those projects complete so we can get that water flowing south. And I think a big, another thing that we did today was, or this year, was some of the water, storing the water north of the lake during the rainy season and then sending it south. And, continuing the project, get that, reservoir built south of the lake. And, we're getting there. But as we all know, it took us 100 years to get there. And hopefully with funding, it won't take us 100 years to correct it. But there's definitely a balance between, population growth and water quality. I grew up in New York and New Jersey area, and when I was a kid, the water in the Raritan Bay was disgusting, and now striped bass and flounder are all over the place. So if we, fund it and have the will, we can make it happen.
And we asked Congressman Donalds about this earlier, but the news just broke this morning that a number of environmental groups are asking the governor to declare a state of emergency because of the cyanobacteria blooms in the lake that are moving into the waterways and headed toward the estuaries. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I've seen some of the reports, but, we all know that algae blooms happen, every year once it starts getting rainy. And again, some of it's just because of more fresh water and higher heat, because heat and fresh water create algae. So, I mean, I don't think it's at a point where we have to declare a state of emergency. And what would that mean? What would a state of emergency, in your opinion, actually mean? What would that do?
I think one thing it would do would be to remove any impediments to moving the water south. And last time we had a state of emergency, this was in the Governor Scott's administration, it freed up funding, sort of small business loans and things that went to mitigate economic damage that the blooms did.
Well, right now our economy is booming and every small business is thriving all throughout the state. So I don't know there's an economic problem with any business that I know in Florida, except, we need everybody to get back to work that can get back to work. And, moving water south, unfortunately, until we finish all these projects, we know it's not going to go south the way we want it until every project is complete.
Yeah, I think that there's a preemptive thought here that last time it got to the point where marinas and charter captains and so on were really feeling the burn. And if I can second guess these groups, I think that the idea is to get out ahead of that this time so that the consequences aren't quite so disastrous.
Well, I mean, every captain I know, and I know hundreds of captains, they've been busy. They're doing 2 runs a day, so they're doing great right now. And again, if we I don't know what that would actually mean, state of emergency. If we just shut down the economy, I think that would be devastating, because then we wouldn't have funds to complete the project.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't think that it would end up shutting down the. Have you you've been out on the water? You said quite a bit.
Whenever I have free time, I go out in the water.
There are some pretty bright green cyanobacteria blooms right now in the Caloosahatchee. I was emailed a photograph this morning from the nature park in LaBelle, and it looks at the shoreline every bit as bad as it did in 2018. So I think that people see this developing and don't want things to get to the point which they did back in 2018.
Well, none of us want that to happen, but unfortunately something just happened, just kind of like with even red tide, why the bloom comes one year and it doesn't come the next year. We're trying to mitigate that with less pollutants in the water, but sometimes they still happen. And in other areas of the world, they happen and there's no people that are there. So, we have to continue what we're doing. We need to continue funding those projects, and hopefully the Biden administration will continue to fund on the federal side the way the Trump administration did the last 4 years, and we'll get those projects complete, and then see what happens after that. But we need to continue everything that's on the books, and unfortunately, sometimes things do happen, and so I'm not sure giving people that work in the marine industry economic incentives not to work is going to be to solve any algae blooms.
Thanks.
Have you run into any red tide while you're out there?
Earlier in the season, I think it was probably more December or January, there was a couple areas of some red tide, and it happens, it irritates your eyes, and unfortunately there were some fish kills, but so far, I don't know if it's lucky or some of the things that we've done over the last 2 or 3 years to help mitigate it. But unfortunately, I'm sure that we're going to see red tide in the future, but hopefully as we finish these projects, it decreases.
I think a lot of the concern might come from the anecdotal fear of once the blue-green algae gets out there into the red tide, then the whole thing just blows up. I think that's maybe what people are preemptively frightened of.
And we should be concerned, but if you talk to different scientists, that's not the reason red tide comes and blooms.
I know, I can't pin them down.
Many of the red tides are hundreds of miles offshore and for thousands of square miles, and they're not near any discharge. Yeah,
people get worried about one feeding the other. There was a lot of conversation about that back in 2018.
Trust me, as somebody that's lived on the water, whether it was in New York or New Jersey or Florida all my life, I'm always concerned about water quality.
I bet you are. Is there anything that you're looking forward to? We've just finished the legislative session. Are you looking forward to next year's legislative session? What are you working on now?
Well, right now we have to go back to Tallahassee in a week to work on the gambling compact. And then after that, I'm going to be looking forward to relaxing a little bit and regrouping. But, thankfully in Florida, our economy was good that we were able to continue to fund these environmental projects and water quality projects this year. Last March of 2019, we were definitely concerned that we would not have, we'd probably have to make a budget cut. And healthcare and education are the two most expensive things that we have. And then, we pay for everything else after that, but we didn't. And we were able to, add the, water reservoirs, north of the lake, continue to fund the projects going forward. And, I know a bunch of local projects got funded also. And, so I think there's a bright future for Florida, even if with 1,100 people moving. It's better than 1,100 people leaving the state, because if people left the state, the budget would definitely get cut and we'd have less money to fix these projects.
I get your point. I understand what you're saying there. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Sorry about the with the camera there.
That's okay. I've done the same thing. We've all been there.
All right. You guys have
probably a couple times in the last year.
Thanks for what you do, and we'll continue to keep Florida clean.
No, I just really appreciate you being willing to talk with us. It's
very much
nice to have someone from the state legislative delegation talk with us about this.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. You guys have a great day.
Thank you so much. And now we're going to turn our attention back to where I was before with Eve Samples, the executive director of Friends of the Everglades. Eve is here with us, and I'm going to turn it over to Eve so she can talk with a number of the stakeholders in the water quality conversation. Eve, take it away.
Thanks, Julie. As our group is joining, it was good to hear from Congressman Donalds and at least one member of the Southwest Florida legislative delegation. It's critical for elected officials to answer to constituents on these issues. And we're going to be talking in some depth about these issues. This is a really important moment. So before we dive right into this advocacy roundtable, I'd like to introduce my fellow panelists here. First, we have Marissa Crozo. She is Everglades and Water Policy Manager at the Conservancy of Southwest Florida. Welcome, Marissa. And we have John Casani. He serves as the Calusa Waterkeeper, which is a member of the International Waterkeeper Alliance. Welcome, John. And James Evans, Environmental Policy Director for Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation. Hi, James.
Good afternoon, Eve.
Last but not least, we have Jessica Pinsky, who is Director of Public Affairs and Policy for Captains for Clean Water. Welcome, Jessica.
Thank you, Eve.
Hi. So we're going to spend the next 20 minutes or so talking about what's going on in our waterways in Southwest Florida and in the greater Everglades ecosystem, because as this group knows very well, it's all interconnected. And we're going to break this discussion into 3 segments. First, we want to talk about what's going on in Lake Okeechobee now. The Army Corps of Engineers is reworking its management plan for Lake Okeechobee. This is a once-in-a-decade process that could bring some relief to the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie estuaries, as well as Lake Worth Lagoon and the Southern Everglades. But we're really in a critical moment in that process now, so we need to talk about it. Second, want to talk about this algae bloom that's in Lake Okeechobee now that appeared in April quite early and alarming, and our concerns about it moving into the northern estuaries through discharges from the lake. And then finally, we're going to talk about the recent legislative session, highs and lows. We'll go around the horn and talk about what we thought went well and what we thought didn't. From my perspective, it was a bit of a defensive game. So we'll discuss. I'd like to kick it off by talking about this new Lake Okeechobee System Operating Manual. And John, I want to start with you by asking what your read is on how much this new lake plan could benefit the northern estuaries. Are you optimistic at all?
Well, I think success is highly predicated on all these large SERP and SEP projects eventually coming online. But the National Academies just was talking about how water quality might trump some of the hydrologic restoration elements of these restoration plans. That's very concerning. We need to keep our eye closely on how these projects will meet water quality-based effluent limitations, which is basically state law for complying with state water quality standards. So a lot of moving parts to it, and still a fair amount of uncertainty in my view.
Good, and I'm going to turn to James next, and just a primer on this topic. When Lake Okeechobee gets too high, the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie estuaries are used as relief valves, and that can be really dangerous to public health and local economies when there is toxic algae in the lake water, as we have seen in recent years. 2018 wasn't too long ago, and I know we all remember that. So, James, I know you've followed this LOSUM process closely, and there are myriad meetings, too much for someone with another day job to keep up with. Do you think that we'll get some relief to the Caloosahatchee in particular?
Thanks, Eve. Great question. So we hope so. We hope that the Army Corps of Engineers takes a truly balanced approach to improving conditions in both the Caloosahatchee and St. Lucie estuaries, while also providing for the other project purposes like water supply, and then moving that water south into the Everglades. Unfortunately, right now, it appears that politics rather than science are driving the process. And, as we start to look at these balanced plans, what was presented on Friday looks like a redistribution of adversity to the Caloosahatchee. And we're very, very concerned that we're moving water from one part of the system to the Caloosahatchee, who's already receiving the lion's share of the water. So, we hope that, with our representatives getting engaged, with Congressman Donalds getting engaged in this process, hopefully we can balance this process out, because right now it's anything but a balanced process for the Caloosahatchee.
Thanks, James. Marissa, would you like to weigh in on what we're seeing with this new lake plan now? How do you think members of the public can effectively weigh in this home stretch? The Army Corps wants to identify a lake plan by July, and then it would take effect next year. What's the best way for residents who are concerned about toxic algae blooms to weigh in now?
It's a great question, Eve. Well, we're looking at this, the Lake Okeechobee Systems Operating Manual update. This is an opportunity that we have to create a more balanced, a more equitable management system. As John mentioned, we have multiple Everglades restoration projects that need to come online as well. But this is one of the tools in the toolbox that we can use now to try to reduce the damaging discharges to the estuaries, send more water south during the dry season, and provide beneficial flows to the Caloosahatchee during the dry season as well, while simultaneously, of course, balancing the need to protect the ecology of the lake. So it is a very complex process, But if in terms of weighing in, if anyone is interested in ensuring that we are, protecting the Caloosahatchee, the St. Lucie, the Everglades, the lake, letting the Army Corps of Engineers know that that is a priority for Southwest Florida constituents or anyone in South Florida is really important to weigh in and get those messages that we need balance. We need to prioritize these natural systems that are the foundation of our economy, our quality of life, and our environment.
Thanks, Marissa. I think sometimes when people hear prioritizing the natural systems, they're not thinking about the second part of what you just said, which is our natural systems are our economy, our quality of life, and of course they are public health, because we know that toxic algae blooms, cyanobacteria, and red tide for that matter can cause health concerns. Jessica, I want to turn it to you on the new Lake Okeechobee plan. What's your read on what we're going to get out of that? One of the concerns I have is that one of the final 5 plans under consideration was essentially written by sugarcane lobbyists. So that doesn't seem like a great direction to head down. What's your read on it?
Yes, thank you, Eve. I mean, it's a crapshoot at this point. No, like James said, I think right now we're at the process of they've developed these different plans, and without getting too complex, it's my understanding that they could potentially take pieces of these different plans and put them together at the end, to make something that hopefully would be beneficial to the Everglades and the environment, the Caloosahatchee and the St. Lucie estuaries. I want to reiterate something that you said, while we're talking about it. I mean, with all of the people moving to Florida at such a record rate and our population growing exponentially, our entire economy is driven by tourism and real estate. And, so what this LOSUM process is doing right now has a tremendous impact on that. And, these industries, they've suffered devastating losses. In 2018, I don't have to remind you, in 2016, I don't have to, we all know, we've all been there, we've all lived through it. We all were part of it. I think every single one of us on this panel, were active with different organizations or outlets at that time. But, they suffer tremendously when this water's dumped on the coast. And, having the Caloosahatchee as the only outlet, is not acceptable. We've got to send that water south in the dry season. So.
Right. Yeah, the crippling effects on the economy are really important to mention. And if you all were listening to Representative Rommel, and I give him credit for being the only state lawmaker to show up to this summit, it is important, but he was a little dismissive of the economic impacts, at least right now. So he says, guides are going out twice a day. They're very busy, but we all know that all it would take is a significant algae bloom this summer and the gates to be thrown wide open east and west from the lake for all of that business to dry up. So it's really important to remember. I know there's a temptation to forget because it's so traumatic when we have green water in our waterways, but it's really critical. So with that in mind, I want to move away from the Army Corps' new lake plan and talk about what's going on Lake Okeechobee right now. So a bit west of the lake, Southwest Florida has been grappling with a red tide bloom since last November. So that's one thing, right? But on the lake itself, we've seen cyanobacteria blooms. Beginning of April, the Army Corps of Engineers issued a notice to mariners that they could encounter toxic blue-green algae. And John, I know that Calusa Waterkeeper has been documenting, chronicling the conditions out there. Tell us about what you've been seeing. And then I want to talk about the emergency order request that was sent to the governor this morning. But first, what are you seeing? Oh, I think you're muted, John. It's got to happen at least once a call.
Yeah, a little icon in the bottom there. Very important. Yeah, I hate to be the bearer of more bad news, but the blue-green algae bloom on Lake Okeechobee has been accelerating since early April. We're seeing at times where spatial coverage is up to 300 square miles. The toxin concentration of microcystin is over 100 times the EPA recreational one-day guideline. Our volunteer pilot contacted me this morning and says it looks like it's moved into the Caloosahatchee in a significant way, just west of LaBelle. So it's coming. The Corps is discharging water at about 2,000 CFS, moving all that cyanobacteria biomass. So what's happening is, along with the red tide, we're moving towards that sort of perfect storm scenario that we saw in 2018. And we think now is the time to act, to giving businesses some incentives to waive regulations in order to more effectively move water to protect millions of people on the coast from this very specific health risk problem. So this morning, and I guess Saturday, we sent a hard copy letter. We sent another email to the governor this morning requesting that he issue an executive order for a South Florida state of emergency in the context of both of these co-occurring algal bloom and public health risk crisis that's before us. We had 14 organizations, South Florida, sign on to this request. So there's broad consensus for it, I think. And I hope we'll be able to elevate that dialogue here in the next couple of days.
And Friends of the Everglades joined that request. I know Sanibel Captiva Conservation Foundation did too. James, I want to ask you about why you joined and what you think this emergency order could accomplish for us in the near term. And just to set the stage for everyone, the lake has been hovering around 14 feet, which is about 2 feet higher than it was this time last year. And when the lake is high, that danger really grows.
Yeah, thanks, Eve. Yeah, we're about 2.5 feet. The lake is currently about 2.5 feet two and a half feet higher than it was at this time during the past 2 years. And we're about 3/4 of a foot higher than we were at this time in 2018. So we're even higher than we were in 2018 when we saw, devastating impacts to the coastal communities. We talked a little bit about the economic impacts, but just as a reminder, in 2018, Sanibel had a $47 million economic impact from the harmful algal blooms that impacted Sanibel Island alone from July to October. The city of Sanibel picked up more than 850,000 pounds of dead marine life from the beaches, including a 10,000-pound whale shark that was 26 feet long, at a cost of about $1.6 million to clean up the beaches. So these have tremendous economic impacts, and that's why it's so critical that we get our legislators involved, because it's not just a water quality issue, it's not just a human health issue, it's really an economic issue, and it's going to impact all of us. But on the lake issues, so, of course, with Lake Okeechobee being as high as it is, and the blue-green algae blooms, that are, like John indicated, almost 300 square miles of the lake last week were covered with blue-green algae. And now that it's moving into the estuaries, we're very concerned about that potentially feeding the red tide blooms that are sitting offshore in Southwest Florida. Right now, we have high concentrations off the coast of Bonita and Naples. We also have medium concentrations in Charlotte Harbor. And of course, what we know from 2018 is when that blue-green algae bloom moved into the river and those cells break down, they release biologically available nitrogen that can feed those red tide blooms. And that's what we saw in 2018, a super bloom. And of course, that's what really devastated our coastal communities was the red tide bloom that reacted as a result. But it's important for the viewers to understand that we aren't claiming that red tide is caused by, these discharges or the nutrients that come from the landscape. But I think the scientists are really coming to a consensus that the nutrients that come from the landscape are exacerbating these red tide blooms because Corynea brevis, the dinoflagellate that is causing red tide, isn't a picky eater. It'll consume whatever nutrients are available as they break down in the coastal waters. So I think that's important to note. So I know a lot of people try to, claim that we're blaming, these red tide events on nutrient runoff, but we're not. The science, I think, is pretty clear at this point that it exacerbates those bloom. And then finally, what we're trying to accomplish by trying to get this executive order or state of emergency is that so that we can respond in a timely manner and have measures in place that allow us to move that water south into the Everglades where it's desperately needed. Barely any water is actually moving south. The only water moving south right now which is about 42% of the total flows out of the lake, is going to the EAA for irrigation. That water is not making it to the Everglades. And so if that water were making it to the Everglades and moving through the system, then we could put more water through the stormwater treatment areas. And those stormwater treatment areas are being taken up. The capacity of those STAs are being taken up almost over 90% by stormwater from the Everglades agricultural area. And what the governor could do is change that policy so that we can move more lake water through those STAs, at least temporarily, so that we can get the lake levels down before the rainy season. I think that's really what we're looking for is a change in policy and a short-term policy so that we can move that water south.
Right, exactly. Remove the constraints so that we can avoid a public health disaster and environmental disaster that is entirely predictable based on current conditions, especially if we see a rainy start to the rainy season. So, Jessica, I want to turn it to you now. The governor is actually going to be making appearances on the east and west coasts of Florida today, we're hearing, and he's going to be talking about lake operations. Curious to hear what you're hoping he'll say. What can he do right now to help us in the near term, in your opinion?
Yes. So, hopefully, I think that the biggest thing that he can do and offer is just to help with in appealing to the Army Corps to send more water south, especially in the dry season, while we're getting and more equitable delivery of water to the Everglades and environment during that time. Holding water in the lake during the wet season, for creating that capacity rather in the wet season to hold more water in the lake. All of this, thereby reducing the harmful discharges. I'm sorry, I have a barking dog in the background. I guess the mail person is walking up. I'm going to mute for just a second.
That's okay. That's the area we're living in. I'm going to turn it to Marissa to weigh on this too, because the Conservancy of Southwest Florida also signed the letter to the governor asking for an emergency order. Anything to add based on what James said and what's already been said, Marissa?
Well, I think the stage has been set really well in the way that James and John and Jessica framed it. But I think it's important to just realize that we have conditions and we're poised to potentially have a repeat of 2018. And Eve, I think as you had alluded to, it can be easy to forget when we've been seeing good water quality on our coasts or in the rivers, just how devastating that these events can be, and that the situation can turn very quickly. And until we have the short-term fixes as well as the long-term fixes in place to address nutrient pollution, to address where and when water is delivered throughout the system, and to have all of the projects in place to store, treat, and convey the water, we are going to continue to find ourselves in this same position over and over again. So I think the emergency order is a way to be proactive about some of the short-term solutions, including everything that James and John and Jessica mentioned, but also to ensure that we are getting the word out to the community about the harmful algal blooms, making sure that that signage is posted quickly, effectively, in the right places, so that people know and it's communicated that these blooms are occurring, that they are harmful, and they have all of the information needed to make informed decisions about where and when they recreate in water throughout South Florida.
It's sadly ironic that we get proactive on water by asking for an emergency declaration, right? I mean, if we were truly proactive in Florida, we would have stricter water quality standards to begin with, pollution standards, and we would be managing the lake better to begin with, instead of for the benefit of special interests south of the lake who happen to contribute heavily to political campaigns. But that's a whole other conversation. With the time we have left, which is not a lot, I do want to talk about the legislative session that just wrapped up at the end of April, the state legislative session. While there wasn't a lot of proactive action in terms of water quality in Lake Okeechobee itself, and I suppose that's a matter of opinion. I want to hear from you all. There is a lot to talk about, so I think we'll just go around the horn, and I'll ask each of you to mention a high and a low from the legislative session, and we'll see if we have any alignment there. So I'll start with John this time.
Yeah, I think the high probably for me was seeing the South Central Corridor MCORs being shelved, basically. We saw how damaging I-75 was to aggravating flooding, and another similar corridor coming down the peninsula would likely have caused the same kind of problem. So looks like that may be on a dusty shelf at this point. Perhaps the thing that concerned me most was Senator Stewart's Senate Bill 1522. It was an attempt to get the recommendations of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force codified by the legislature. So many critically important elements of that bill that need to move forward quickly. Unfortunately, it died on the vine. So we're continuing to advocate. We're continuing to do more outreach on these issues relating to blue-green algae, but looks like the legislature is not going to really help us on that one.
Okay, I'll turn it back to you, Jessica. Highs and lows from the recent session?
Yeah, so I think everyone has heard about the abundance of money that was in the state budget this year. So yes, we're very happy for the continued funding levels. In regards to Everglades restoration money, they established that resilient grant program at DEP. There was money allotted to that, money for Biscayne Bay, money for the Piney Point cleanup, and that's all good and great. But as you guys know, funding is only part of the solution. Actual legislation that improves water quality, was hard to come by this session. I agree with John. What he said. I think we were disappointed. We'd love to see, SB 712 last session. That was what we view as a very, small starting point. We would love to see the additional recommendations of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force implemented, and that is, critical, and addressing pollution at its source, that is going to we've got to do something right now, from Piney Point to Apalachicola Bay to the reef in Key West, Biscayne Bay, Indian River Lagoon, the manatees. It's a problem all over the state, and we have to start addressing pollution at its source and holding polluters accountable. And that's where, the legislature has got to start focusing on that. And that's where, we see, where the biggest, the biggest need for improvement is. Like I said, the funding is great. The governor, staying committed to keeping those Everglades restoration on track is great, but we've got to, address pollution at its source.
Thanks, Jessica. James, what's your take on highs and lows from the session?
Thanks, Steve. Yeah, the highs were definitely the funding, especially for the Everglades projects, including funding for the C-43 reservoir and the Everglades Agricultural Area Reservoir, two projects that will really help the Caloosahatchee by getting some of that water that's in the lake south with the EAA reservoir, and then of course the C-43 reservoir will help store that water that we need in the dry season to help provide our dry season flows. Also, the funding for Florida Forever, very important for land acquisition, of course, for our conservation lands, very important. Plus, there was some money that was put into the Resiliency Grant Trust Fund program. I think it was $500 million to address flooding and sea level rise issues. So that's really important for our coastal communities throughout Florida. So those are some of the highs. I also agree with John on the MCOR's partial repeal. That's an important bill as well. There are still going to be some impacts from that bill, which we're not very happy about, but it did remove most of the harmful aspects of the MCOR's project. As far as lows, there were a whole suite of bills that were aimed at preempting local home rule, taking away local government's ability to regulate their own communities from a land use planning standpoint. And I won't go through all of them, but there was one called the Relief from Burdens of Real Property Rights, HB 1101. There was a preemption of local occupational licenses. That was SB 268. Those bills are just expand private property rights, and of course, beyond what we already provide in state law. And of course, that really ties the hand of local governments that want to adopt rules to protect water quality and shape their communities. So those are, I would say, those are some harmful bills that we saw this legislative session, and we expect more in the future as Tallahassee likes to tie the hands of local governments and their ability to shape their communities.
Thank you, James. I'll turn it to Marissa. Highs and lows from your perspective.
Okay, well, I would say that my colleagues have covered most of them, so I will just say ditto on the funding aspect, Everglades, C-43 Reservoir, Florida Forever. All of that is great. The MCOR's repeal, obviously, and we're hoping that the governor will sign that bill as well. That would be the next step. And on the low side, the preemption bills that we're going through, is very disappointing. And the Blue-Green Algae Task Force recommendation is that that we still have a number of them that have not been adopted or moved forward, and really need to see action from the legislature on those. And I'll just add, so I don't end on a low note, that the one of the Blue-Green Algae Task Force recommendations that is moving forward right now is updating the statewide stormwater standards for development and potentially redevelopment projects. And as was noted earlier in the conversations, I think with both Congressman Donalds and Representative Rommel, we have a booming population in Florida. We're continuing to see an incredible amount of new residents moving here every day. And the way we develop and how we develop has a significant impact as well on our water quality. And so this is rulemaking that's going forward right now that we do have an opportunity to improve how we treat and store water for development projects. So just encourage everyone to keep an eye on that.
Thanks, Marissa. You all covered it well. I'll just add two things that didn't come up yet. There has been a lot of talk about the water storage north of Lake Okeechobee, the ASR wells. And from our perspective at Friends of the Everglades, we're not convinced that those wells, which will store water 1,000 feet underground and will be constructed to the tune of 80 of them, will do enough to alleviate discharges east and west. And it's really just a numbers issue. Each well can pump about 7.7 cubic feet per second. A cubic foot is like a football's worth of water. And even if all 80 of those were working at the same time, running at peak capacity, it's not enough to save the discharges, save the estuaries from discharges east and west. So it's more of a water storage project for agriculture north of the lake than an Everglades restoration project from our perspective. And the only other one that didn't come up that's worth noting is the so-called right to farm bill was strengthened this session, and the legislature approved adding language that prevents legal action over particle emissions. So that could mean sugarcane burning. And we're really concerned about what that could mean for residents south of Lake Okeechobee who are exposed to fumes, smoke from sugarcane burning. Definite health concerns there. So we could have spent a whole hour talking about the legislative session. I know I know that we'll all be continuing to watch these issues. I want to thank you so much for your time. We'll be hearing from journalists in Southwest Florida next about their take and what they're working on water quality issues in Southwest Florida. So thank you all again for joining.
Thanks, Eve.
It's so fun, all these little squares just going from place to place and back and forth, and we're rotating, and okay, we're here. So one of the things, and we're all here. Oh, Valerie's in the house. Okay, so one of the things that keeps people informed as to what's happening in their environment, other than walking outside and breathing in and finding out, is the media. We're the people who try to hold our elected officials accountable as pertains to many things, including water quality. So now we're happy to turn things over to Steve McQuilkin with the News Press, who's going to lead this journalist roundtable, including Amy Bennett-Williams, Chad Gillis from the News Press, and WGCU's environmental reporter and my colleague Valerie Vandepan, as well as yours truly. Steve, handing it over to you. Steve, are you here? Steve's not with us. Not here yet. Okay. Well, Steve's not here, so I guess I'll just go ahead and kick things off by expressing my irritation that only one of numerous representatives from our region who represent us in Tallahassee was willing to come on to this water summit. And I think we were nice. We didn't grill anybody. Anyone? And I think we were very nice and kind. We would like for them to participate. We sent a lot of emails. We made a lot of phone calls. Very few responded. 2 said no, they can't. And then we ended up with Bob Rommel, who was able to withstand our line of questioning. So, what am I hearing? Sorry, okay, there we go. So anyway, Steve's with us now. So Steve, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to you. My only beef is that we want to hold people accountable, but we can't get them to come on and do the deal and just do the,
Julie, I agree with you though about the public. I would like to say public servants, but
yeah, when we pay their salary, we voted them into office. Just talk to us about what's going on. That's all we're asking. They didn't have a job. No.
All we're asking is for public information, public knowledge, public records, a response for where our tax dollars are going. So I don't think it's unfair at all.
What's going on?
Exactly.
And we face challenges communicating with agencies as well.
Yeah.
I think it's gotten worse since Trump. I think a lot more public servants are kind of following his playbook when it comes
like we
to
don't
dealing
need
with
to even
us.
deal with the media.
Yes.
Well, Rick Scott really started it here, if you remember, back in 2010, and he just closed off the media completely and wanted to hold his own press conferences and do it his own way. And I think that really set a precedent that has, I think, has harmed readers and the public.
Yeah, there's just not a lot of information flow and not of responsiveness. And it continues to this day with 45 minutes before a news conference, we get an email from the governor's office saying they're going to have a news conference with no idea what it is other than it's a major announcement in all caps. We have no idea if it's about education, gambling, environment, nothing. So, I mean, these things, this is just this new posture of we're Republican, we're going to win your area anyway, so we don't even have to do it. Does that make sense? Something on.
I think we're getting a little feedback.
I think someone has their Facebook feed open. If they could close the Facebook feed, I think that will solve the problem.
Did we get it? Who are we?
It says everyone can see and hear me now.
There we go.
I
Can
can
you
see
guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi.
Yes.
Take it over.
Wonderful. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I think the Facebook Live thing was doing something to me. So, all right, I'm just going to jump in. I'm not sure if I missed anything already, but Chad, I wanted to start with you because of the news today. We want to get at sort of. Can you talk more about like the state of emergency that was declared today by various environmental groups? We've heard from some of them, but you've got a rich history of covering environment here for 20 years. So what do you think is behind that? How much has this been building? You might want to take us back to the devastating 2018 double whammy that we had.
Yeah, it wasn't declared, it was asked for. Emergency hasn't been declared yet. I think these groups want to get out ahead of the conditions. In 2018, we kind of got blindsided a little bit, even though the blooms were lingering. They came together in the summer and just made this super duper algae festering situation that really gave us trouble in our area. But right now, what we're seeing is blue-green algae developing on the lake. We're seeing it some in the upper portions of the river, St. Lucie River area. People are concerned about that. But we haven't yet heard from the governor's office as to what response they may have. I think the petitioners are asking the governor to remove any sort of obstacles to allowing water to flow to the south and back into Everglades National Park, and not so much out the Caloosahatchee River estuary and the St. Lucie as well.
Sure. And because this is your area of expertise, what are the ideal levels for Lake Okeechobee? Because we know it's kind of high right now, but a year ago, under some pressure from Congressman Mass and others, water managers have held the levels down much more than it is right now. So can you kind of make that comparison for us? What are we looking at now?
Yeah, the Army Corps since 2008 has tried to keep the level at between 12.5 feet and 15.5 feet above sea level. And that is a goal. The 15.5 feet would be at the end of the rainy season. The 12.5 feet would be at the beginning of the rainy season. I'm sorry, did I say that right? The 15.5 feet would be at the end of the rainy season, and the 12.5 feet would be at the beginning of the rainy season, if I'm saying that right. And the levels fluctuate though greatly. They drop to as low as 11 feet, and they can get high above 15 feet. They can get 16 feet, 17 feet above sea level. And we've been really afraid of that in recent years because the Herbert Hoover Dike has not been structurally, has the integrity of the structure has not been as safe as we would want. But the Army Corps has been working on some reinforcements and rebuilding a lot of the dike in hopes that it will be stronger in the future.
Sure. And that is the giant earthen berm that surrounds the entire lake. And I guess for our viewers too, most of them probably know this, but because we get 900 to 1,000 people a day in Florida, we have some newcomers. You know, the way the Caloosahatchee is hooked up to Lake O is not natural at all. I mean, the Caloosahatchee River starts as a straight canal. That's why we're concerned when we hear about 300 square miles of a bloom. Right now, you know, are you seeing, Chad or Amy, the sort of the similarities that some of the others have talked to? In other words, 2018 similarities right now with a big bloom on the lake. You know, the lake's pretty high, so you're probably going to have to release more water soon, you know, faster. Are you guys seeing some of the same conditions?
Somebody emailed me a photo this morning from downtown LaBelle, the little nature park area, and, you know, streaks of neon green algae that looked very much like what we were seeing at the beginning of 2018. And the advocacy people right before us were talking about the same thing and trying to, this time, as Chad said, get out in front of it, because at least at the moment, it's looking like what we saw back then.
Sure. Well, why don't we switch gears just a little bit so we don't run out of time. We have some good stuff to get to. This is for Valerie. How might the recently signed Right to Farm bill impact water quality?
Well, the Right to Farm bill that the governor just signed. Can you hear me okay? I'm getting some feedback. Okay. All right. So the bill that the governor just signed basically prohibits people who live more than half a mile away from a farm from filing suit against an industrial farm accident. So, for example, a sugar burn is happening, you're in a school and live, you know, a mile away, you have no more recourse to address your respiratory ailments, your health issues, your family health issues that can be caused by that burning. And it also gets into, for example, industrial animal farming, right? There's an odor that those farms smell like. And up in the Carolinas and Georgia, that's a big issue right now, is that waste smell is leading to lawsuits and entire towns taking action against these industrial farms. So this is kind of preemptive in that way. We haven't heard much about those issues here in Florida, but they certainly exist and they certainly will exist. And if it gets extreme, especially in the heat, you've got these waste ponds, you know, you've got a hurricane comes through, spreads that waste, that odor, you know, these are, we need food, and industrial ag isn't going anywhere. And certainly I have a sweet tooth. I like sugar, right? But I think we really are kind of entering a danger zone here where these industrial farms aren't really being held accountable. And one of the main ways that civilians and civically minded people have to address these issues has been basically eliminated by this bill.
Gotcha. That's a good one. And definitely we support all of our American farming operations and stuff like that. It's just that this becomes sort of a tug of war between what works and what's best for the average person.
Yeah, I mean, you can't eat sugar if you're dead. You can't eat sugar if you're dying of cancer or something. So there needs to be this balance, and we really need to put public health. We need to value that as much as we value making money. And I think there are solutions.
That's a very good segue into something I wanted to ask Amy. Amy's done a lot of reporting about the Department of Health because, again, especially during 2018, they were not sufficiently transparent or responsive to us while we were trying to get information. So Amy, could you talk a little bit, just remind us what was going on back then, and have there been any changes in the way the agency is dealing with this now?
Sure. As 2018 was unfolding, we were asking them regularly what they were going to do, what their thoughts about educating the public about potential health concerns were, whether or not they were going to seize the opportunity to study this so that if it happened again, they would be able to match their response or at least have a baseline. I mean, just really basic questions that anyone would want answered by the public agency that they fund as taxpayers. And we didn't get anything. And finally, we did a big public records request and got all of their internal emails for a couple of key people. And what we found was that they didn't know which end was up. They were scrambling about trying to coordinate messaging and should they answer calls and what should they tell people. And it was really kind of a mess. And the other thing too was that when these blooms would reach populated areas, places where people recreated, this is what John Cassani's been really emphasizing, like the Franklin Locks, the Alba Dock, the health department did not take the lead in posting signs or sending out emails or letting people know that there was a risk here that they might want to consider and what that risk would be. So fast forward to now, there for one thing, there's been a lot of personnel changes at the upper level of the Department of Health, and I'm still not having much more success speaking with the thought leaders in the department than I was back in 2018. However, at a local level, there are some key changes. We do get regular emails from the local PIO of the Lee County Public Health Unit, and signs are beginning to appear. When there was a cyanobacteria bloom at the Alba Dock and at the Franklin Locks, sure enough, the next day, the Department of Health had laminated signs up warning recreational users of the potential risk. So that has changed. And another thing the Department of Health has done is funded research. We recently reported on Florida Gulf Coast University scientist who is working on measuring how cyanotoxins become aerosolized. That is largely funded with the Department of Health money, as is work at universities throughout the state. So some very concrete changes and still some challenges.
Sure, that is some progress. Valerie, what is this concept about rights of nature, and is it being applied in Florida?
So y'all might have heard recently about rights of nature, which is basically what it sounds like, that nature has rights. And it's very common in other countries. So for example, Colombia, Ecuador, Uganda, Bolivia is one of the best. They all honor and respect nature. In our society, nature doesn't have rights. Corporations have rights, but nature does not. So it's a growing movement here in the US. In Pennsylvania, Ohio, and Oregon, there are active movements on behalf of nature. And here in Florida, in Orange County, the voters passed a rights of Nature ballot initiative in November. And now we actually see our first lawsuit filed on that issue to protect. Let's see. I'll tell you just one second. I want to make sure I get it right who's filing it.
That's fine.
The plaintiffs of this lawsuit filed under Rights of Nature is Wild Cypress Branch, Boggy Branch, Crosby Island Marsh, Lake Hart, and Lake Mary Jane. And the idea is basically that these ecosystems, they have the right to exist, and they have the right to exist healthfully, and they have the right to support all their animal life and their plant life and their aquatic life and their avian life. And that if you want to come in and dump there, and even if you have a permit to dump there, if it's killing that nature, you can't dump there because it's killing, and those beings have the right to live. So it's really exciting that this movement is taking hold. Over 30 municipalities in Florida are now seeking to look at some kind of rights of nature initiative in their own locations. And it'll be interesting to see how it develops here in Florida and nationwide as we kind of grapple with the issue of pollution and permitting and corporations and, extinction.
Sounds like something we'll definitely want to keep covering. So that's a very good one. And somewhat related, Chad, I know there was a lot of criticism when the state took over permitting for dredge and filling of wetlands. And I know you've done some reporting on that. Can you kind of talk to that and bring us up to date on what's going on with the dredge and fill permits?
Yeah, the dredge and fill permits are part of the Clean Water Act. It's a way to hopefully ensure that there's no net loss of wetlands. And the idea is that if you destroy wetlands by developing it, that you pay for mitigation and that other lands get upgraded. There's been some concern about the state taking over the program. This is only the third state in the nation that has done it so far, because there was a federal level of review that is not built into this process as well as it was when the Army Corps was doing the permitting. So there's some concern that there won't be as much endangered species review. There won't be as much review when it comes to just the ecological and hydrological aspects of these permits. So there's a lot of concern. There's concerns that small wetlands are being lost, and small wetlands are very important. They play important roles for the ecology, and they're also part of the greater wetland system. So we are losing wetlands in Southwest Florida, tens of thousands of acres in the last few decades. There's a concern that pace may speed up if the state continues to streamline the permitting process under DEP.
Gotcha. And this kind of relates back because it goes back to development. I wanted to put Valerie back on the spot again, just to kind of talk about, the defeat of MCORS was a big deal for a lot of the people watching this stuff, a lot of the people in the environmental field. So could you talk about that a little bit and, plans north of Tampa and all that, sort of where the state's at with roads right now? Like, what did we win or lose? What's still on the plate? That kind of thing.
So the MCORS task force, it was really interesting because one of the things they were able to get in the bill when they first passed it was that they had to do robust analysis, research, and public comment. And they, on each one of these 3 toll roads they had planned, they got thousands of comments, which was fantastic, right? The public was overwhelmingly in unison against this plan. And then COVID happened. So it was already kind of financially tenuous anyway. There wasn't really a lot of money there. And now there's definitely, I think, some question as to the financial feasibility of these things. So I think that kind of was a recipe for maybe, we don't really need it. And then, of course, the person who really was a champion of it is no longer with us in the legislature. So it just kind of, in a lot of ways, fizzled out. But we still have SB 100, which of course is championed by someone who commutes on I-75 north of Tampa and, wants to have her commute made a little bit easy, I think. So SB 100 would actually fund revitalizing US 19, which is also a north-south corridor up north of Tampa towards I-10. So I think what's interesting about this is there were the public galvanization against it was really, really wonderful. And if the public was always that engaged and paying attention to what was happening on every issue, I think we would see some different things in the state. But, you know, the Panther inspires passion. And when you get a lot of people passionate about one thing, it's really easy to defeat it. We have a lot of things that people must be passionate about in Florida, but it's nice when they can come together and do that.
Sure, that sounds good. Yeah, it's tough because roads are good. A lot of people just say, hey, if I can drive to Disney World faster, that's a good thing. But at the same time, you know, if it cuts off panther habitat or messes up with water flows, that's where a lot of people had grave concerns. So
yeah, they can always move to Celebration if that's really what they're looking for.
All right, so Amy, here's another related one for you, and it sort of goes back to you know, some of the discussion that came up in our early panels, which is the climate change and how are we preparing for that and increasing our resiliency. I know we've had some grants, for instance, in Collier County, as far as shoring up some of the communities there in Naples. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, as you mentioned, grants, and then actually last week the Charlotte Harbor, oh gosh, I always get the new acronym mixed up. It's the Heartland and Estuary Coastal and Heartland, Chad knows, National with the NEP. How about that? But
we just call it CHAP.
Yeah, they had a similar virtual summit where they participants included people from the EPA and Noah Valenstein, who, in addition to heading the state's Department of Environmental Protection, is our state's chief resiliency officer. And everyone sort of agreed that a lot has been done and a lot still needs to be done. Something that we've reported on a little, and I think there's an opportunity to get more in depth in, is this compact that municipalities have formed, sort of a pledge of mutual support and aid as they work on hardening our coastlines and making sure that people aren't in dangerous places in terms of evacuation times. And that's something Chad has reported on. There was a project on San Carlos Island, right, that had just ridiculously long potential evacuation times. And someone at that event said a line that sticks with me, and that is, do we want Florida to turn into one giant seawall? So as we as a state think about these issues, you know, you have to decide how we're going to do it. If it's all going to be hardening and fortification and taller buildings and, you know, everything built to the Miami-Dade hurricane standard, or do we want to do wetland preservation and mangrove restoration? And I think we're still figuring this out. There are some very strong advocates for this at Florida Gulf Coast University, including Dr. Mike Savarese, who's working on this a lot. And Francis Rooney, as Byron Donalds alluded to, was also really trying to get out ahead of this. And Byron Donalds says that he is going to pick up that mantle and carry that torch. So he didn't have a lot of specifics to share with us about what he was doing, but at least it's on his radar. And I think if we continue to ask him about it, he won't forget about it.
Sure. And Julie, do we have time for one or two more questions?
Sure, we do.
Beautiful. Okay, so I've got another one for Chad. Chad has done a great job in the past of covering north of the Everglades. I know he and Andrew West, one of our videographers, took a canoe trip from just south of Orlando all the way to the top of the lake. So you've seen and talked to farmers there and all kinds of things firsthand. So I kind of want to get a little bit of your perspective on that, but also the fact that there's still talk about these deep wells, you know, injecting the water deep into the earth to kind of store it or set up more reservoirs north. And can you just tell us why north of the lake is so important and what you remember from talking to farmers and people on the ground there? What are their concerns?
Well, it's a very important part of the Everglades because that's where the vast majority of water that flows into Lake Okeechobee comes from, is from just south of Orlando to the north end of the lake. And we found vast concerns along the way. It's more of a southern town kind of feeling to it. We would literally canoe up to people's houses and just ask them if we could camp with them and stay the night. And they'd build a bonfire and have friends over and cook us food. So it was just every night it was a new kind of adventure like that. But the people there are worried about water quality as well. A lot of the people that we talk to on the ground believe it's coming from the northern segment in the Kissimmee area, some of the more populated areas. But if you look, the area that drains into the Everglades from the north, it's largely agriculture in undeveloped areas. So the vast pollution load historically has come from that industry. But we enjoyed the canoe trip. I would love to do it again. Like I said, the people were really kind. They opened their doors and they let us in, and we made it in 9 days. It was a lot of fun.
That's good. That is real good. And then here's another one, just and any one of you can take it, but one of our biggest concerns here is red tide, and red tide has been lingering and lingering and lingering. And, that's really where it hits us. I mean, blue-green algae is awful also. It's terrible when you get them both at the same time. But what are our thoughts right now as far as the red tide? Because it is really starting to kill fish in various places. Sea turtles, we're starting to hear about those. We haven't heard that for a while. Will one of you jump in and just talk about how concerned people are right now about red tide and what we're looking at as far as risk factors?
Okay. As we have reported, it's patchy, it moves around, and it's there now, and it's place to place. One of the things that the panel before us, the advocates, were talking about is the interaction of landscape runoff with red tide blooms. And the legislators are always quick to say, well, this is natural and it happens offshore, and it's something to be expected. But the water quality advocates along the coast say yes, and the things that we do on our landscape can feed these organisms. I think James Evans said I'm paraphrasing, it's a hungry thing and it'll eat whatever is in front of it. And so until we address what is running into the water from the landscape, we're probably going to see enhanced impacts. I did a story last week about illness in shorebirds that may not be a direct impact of red tide. The Clinic for Rehabilitation of Wildlife says it looks like brevetoxicosis. Other scientists are saying, well, maybe not. Maybe these critters are eating things that are being killed by brevetoxins. Meanwhile, there are human health studies going on up in Sarasota. The Roskamp Institute is looking for both coastal and inland volunteers to measure the potential health impacts of brevetoxins. It's similar to what Florida Atlantic University and maybe, stay tuned, the CDC is doing as well with people who live and work around Lake Okeechobee and the estuaries on either sides. They'll try to see what this stuff is doing once it's in people's bodies. So Steve, steer me back. Is there anything else about red tide that we need to talk about? Are you just asking how bad it is right this second?
Yeah, I think that's it. And I just wanted Chad to weigh in real quickly. You did a great job on that one. And Chad, can you just weigh in on the 2018 one? Because I know you did stories about just thousands of tons of fish, sea turtles. What did you actually see and write about?
Well, it was very strange going to the beach. I tried to go 2 or 3 times a week as much as I could stand it. And it was just like it's like a bomb had went off at the beach. Nobody was there. Nobody was anywhere. You could go to Bunch Beach and look across to Fort Myers Beach and there would be no one. But you would smell the stench of dead organic material, for lack of a better word. That was the worst smell I've ever smelled in my life, was when a bunch of fish were piled together and there were eels falling out of a Goliath grouper's mouth, and it looks like it was just vomiting mullet into this big pile of just festering algae. It was really bad. It was to the point where you got out of the car and it would initially start burning in my throat. When I would step out at, say, at Bunch or go to Fort Myers Beach, it was very difficult for me to breathe. And I would say I have probably a moderate reaction to red tide. I know if it's in the air, it'll tickle my throat a bit and I'll notice it, but I seem to be able to tolerate it okay. I'm not super sensitive to it.
It's kind of like mild pepper spray. One thing that Valerie's been kind of looking into is, I don't want to silver lining it, but the use of masks and how that is useful in protecting people against red tide irritation in the lungs, especially for people that already have other problems like asthma or COPD or something like that. Valerie, can you tell me what you found out about that?
Well, yes, Julie, I can. And that's exactly it. It's that, now that we're all kind of accustomed to wearing masks anyway, red tide lives in the tiny particles of water that are in the air. So when you're wearing a mask, it prevents those little tiny particles of water from you aspirating them, and it keeps them out of your lungs. So for people who have asthma or COPD or some other kind of lung challenge, wearing a mask has been beneficial in reducing that irritation. I just also want to add that, at WGCU, we do a red tide update at least once a week, often twice or even 3 times a week if it's a heavy week with red tide. It's always happening. I think the first thing is to always know where it is. So you can learn where it is. We always have a map on our website. You can also go to FWC has a map for their daily sampling, so you know where red tide blooms are and what levels that they're at before you go. And then the other thing, I think, oftentimes, like when you talk about landscape runoff and those nutrients getting into the water, of course, that's part of it. But my sense is that when industrial ag or industry in general is able to turn the tables of the conversation and put them on the consumer, that leads to a kind of a sense of despair and consumers thinking, oh, am I going to water my lawn? Am I going to fertilize my lawn? Or do I not have any options? And it's all my fault. Oh, I've been fertilizing my lawn for 20 years. I'm contributing. And that's not really, it's not really rational, because you do have industrial players that are, contributing significantly more than even an entire community of people. And you have these situations where, for example, sewage systems are outdated and need to be updated. You have all of these things kind of contributing to a problem. It's not just like, I'm going to stop fertilizing my lawn and that'll help make a difference. It really needs to be a multifaceted effort on multiple levels. And we really do need to get industry to take action. And we need to make sure that any regulations that are in place to help industry, whether it's a local municipality sewage department or big ag, to take action to make sure that they're not feeding these little critters too.
Yeah. And I would add, just to kind of put a fine point on and wrap it up for us, is that back in 2018, realtors reported to us losing sales because it was so bad, both the double whammy of the blue-green algae and the red tide. And also we lost who knows how many hundreds of thousands of revenue from lost hotel rooms because people were coming for a week stay and leaving after 2 or 3 days. And that was also reported. It was a tough time. And so I think that kind of got everybody, no matter where you were on the spectrum, as far as business or environmentalists or you name it, everyone kind of got behind clean water back then in a way that we haven't seen in a long time. So hopefully that kind of conversation and energy will continue, because this is science. A lot of it is science. And it makes for some interesting stories, but we do need to really get behind what's causing all the blue-green algae, what is causing, what is feeding at least red tide, even if we know naturally it occurs out there and is always kind of lingering. Why sometimes does it just explode on us? And so those are the kind of things that we're going to have to, as journalists, continue to hit and get those explanations for people. And Julie, that's all I had. I think we should wrap. Did you have anything else?
Sorry, can I just add something about blue-green algae? Blue-green algae is fed, we know it's fed by agricultural nutrients. We know that, that's a fact. It's the same blue-green algae we have problems with in Southwest Florida is the same blue-green algae they have problems with in Lake Erie and in Toledo and even in Alaska now, because of climate change, the same algae is up there. It's being fed by industrial ag, and it is problematic across, like from Alaska to Southwest Florida. So we know what's causing it. So, I don't know if we need rights of nature, like rights of the natural water ecosystem to step in and take precedence over ag runoff or what, but that's a pretty well-defined, like we know what causes blue-green algae. And there are places all over the country dealing with it.
And just to be fair, for some of our listeners out there are going to be saying, what about runoff from communities? That's true. The septic tanks that need to be converted. We did get some more money this year to convert more septic tanks to sewer system, which should help because those are notorious too. But you're absolutely right. We know that, what are the building blocks? It's nitrogen and phosphorus. So we do have to watch all that. And I think it's something we're going to have to continue to report and see all those different things. All right, Julie, I think you can take us out of here. Thank you so much for all this help.
I'll take it home. But first, I want to thank the News Press, Naples Daily News, Friends of the Everglades for even coming together to talk about our water for this virtual water summit. And I want to thank U.S. Congressman Byron Donalds and Florida State Representative Bob Rommel for stepping up to be part of this conversation. If any of these topics sparked interest to you as a citizen, I want to encourage you to reach out and contact the people that you have elected to hold them accountable and let them know how you feel. Thanks also to the tireless advocates for clean water and a healthy Everglades ecosystem who talked about key issues this past legislative session. For Amy Bennett-Williams, Chad Gillis, Valerie Vandepen, Steve McQuilkin, and Eve Staples, I'm Julie Glenn. So thank you for joining us.
Thanks, y'all.